All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Chasing Tails Outdoor Podcast, where it's our hope that the tips, tricks, and stories you hear on our podcast encourage you to get outside and enjoy the great outdoors. On today's episode, I went solo. Walt was unable to travel with me. I actually traveled down to the Central Florida area to interview a gentleman that sits at the top of the Florida State Big Buck Registry. He's number one. He killed a 206-inch deer back in 1999. He's very humble. It's just, to him, it was a great experience. He still just loves to hunt and get after it, and you could tell that in the podcast. A great guy to be around. Him and I actually went and shot our bows and stuff at his pro shop after the podcast. So that was a great time. I had a great time visiting with him down there. His deer wall, as I would call it, is super impressive. He's got some really, really nice Florida bucks, as well as quite a few Midwest whitetails on his wall that were really impressive. He's absolutely super passionate about hunting. He uses some tactics that maybe a lot of people wouldn't use on public land here in Florida. He likes to run mock scrapes. He runs a ton of cameras. I think he ran over 30-something cameras last year alone. And he even calls deer here in Florida, which is a tactic that a lot of people don't use because they think it scares the deer. At the end of the podcast, we talk about his whitetail hunt where he was able to take the 206-inch deer and actually where it is located now. But before we get to that episode, we have got to thank the patrons of this show. The patrons help make this show possible. Our Marco Polo group of patrons that we have is growing rapidly. We have a great time over there. So if you're considering joining our Patreon, you can go to www.patreon.com/Chasing Tails Outdoors. We just gave away a tethered Phantom saddle along with some accessories. And for this quarter, we are giving away a set of the Timber Ninja carbon fiber C1s. If you'd like to check those out, you can go to the Timber Ninja Outdoors website. I hope everybody is out there getting ready for hunting season. It's fastly approaching for actually a lot of states. And here in Florida, there'll be people out hunting as early as the beginning of August, possibly late July. I know our season here is rapidly approaching as well. So I hope everybody's out there getting their bow tuned up and getting everything ready for this upcoming season. And without anything else, on to the episode with Mr. James Stovall.
All right, everybody. I have made the drive down to Central Florida area to be with the man that sits at the top of the record books for the Florida State Big Buck Registry with a 206-inch buck, I believe, killed back in 1999. So it's almost been 21 years since that wonderful day for him. I'm bringing him on the podcast to talk a lot about his tactics and strategies that he uses on a lot of the public land that he hunts down here. So I'd like to welcome Mr. James Stovall to the podcast. How are you doing, bud?
I'm doing good, Chase, and I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you say that because I actually wanted to – I was talking to the other host, Walter, back in January, and I was like, we need to get this guy on the podcast because I'd found your Facebook or something, and I knew the name because I'd seen it in the buck registry because I'd looked at the buck registry before, and of course it's like the first name you see if you pull up the buck registry, and I knew you were semi close to where I was at, and I was like, hey, we need to get this guy on the podcast because I checked out your Facebook stuff, and you do a lot of stuff on Facebook where you're going over your mock scrapes and things that you like to use for hunting on public land down here. I was like, we need to get this guy on, but I didn't want to get you on at the end of the season. I was like, we just need to kind of wait, and then we'll get it to where it's kind of leading into deer season, because we're not too far away. We're
Right.
like 70-something days away from deer
everybody's
season down here.
getting cranked up.
Oh, yeah. Everyone's out shooting their bows and getting all their equipment ready and tinkering with stuff that they kind of put off in the off season. And I was hoping that Walter could come down here too, but unfortunately he's up in Tallahassee, and he had some things going on, so he couldn't get down here. But before we get started with the podcast, why don't you give us a kind of a drone view of who James Stovall is and how you got into hunting?
All right. Well, I'm 51. Hard to believe, but I'm 51 years old now. And I started bow hunting in 1984. And so my uncle and grandfather took me hunting. So my stepfather, he was unfortunately he was killed at work when I was 9 years old. And his brother and dad, which, I've always considered them, family, because that's really all I knew as a father figure and that side of the family. So once he passed, my mom purchased my first bow when I was 13 years old, and I shot a lot. And then through the years, I started carrying a gun at the age of 10, right the year after my father was killed. And I would go with my grandfather and uncle. And my grandfather, he had a list 10 commandments of gun hunting, of deer hunting, safety rules. And he wouldn't let me carry a gun until I memorized and answered all those questions correct. So age 10, started out hunting the bombing range, Avon Park bombing range. And at 10 years old, he would walk me in, put me in a ladder stand, or actually it was a pine tree with nails driven in it. This was a long time ago. And 2x4s nailed across the limbs. And he'd say, sit there, don't move until I come back, only shoot deer with horns. And that was my first official hunt when I was 10 years old. And I was carrying a 12-gauge Remington 1100 3-inch Magnum buckshot. Still have it. That was my dad's. And then, so I started bow hunting at age 14 and loved it. Killed a doe the first weekend I went, and I was hooked on it. Loved shooting a bow, archery from the get-go. And that's, to this day, that's my favorite pursuit, archery, chasing whitetails. And out of all the game animals you can hunt, whitetails is by far my favorite. And anymore, when I go on trips, I don't have to kill one for it to be a success. I enjoy the opportunity to chase big whitetails wherever I go, or try to locate, good whitetails. And I don't have to, like I said, I don't have to kill one to enjoy it.
Right.
I've passed some pretty good whitetails locally here and Midwest, Ohio, Indiana, those places. And, hoping for a big, huge buck, So anyway, I enjoy hunting. I have 2 sons. My oldest one never took to it. And my youngest, he's 12, and he's all about it. So he's always wanting to be in my hip pocket. And he actually, when we shoot here in the yard, he beats me about half the time.
Nice.
Out when we shoot 60 yards, he always wants to have competitions, and he's well beyond his years in shooting. My oldest son, he shot in 4-H, and he did well when he shot, but he just never took to the hunting side of it. So,
okay.
Anyway, so I've been hunting since, I guess, 34 years or whatever, bow hunting, and a little bit longer gun hunting. And like you, I'm sure I think of it every day of the year. Can't wait to get back in the woods. I'm always thinking about it.
Yeah. Me for sure. I mean, the same thing. That's my favorite thing to do is go after whitetail. I love killing them with a bow, but I'll still pursue them with a muzzleloader or a rifle, given the chance, especially in a state like Florida. Bringing up a state like Florida, why don't you give the listeners what your kind of view of Florida hunting is?
Well, I've hunted all over the Midwest, somewhere around 13 different states, and I've killed some, nice deer in the Midwest, but there's still nothing like killing a good buck here in Florida. I'd rather kill a 100-inch buck here than a 140, 150 in the Midwest. It means more to me locating, hunting, and closing the deal on a good public land Florida buck with my bow than hunting the Midwest and killing, a bigger buck. Right. So I think hunting in Florida it's a lot more difficult, especially public land with a bow, to consistently year after year kill good bucks. And compared to the Midwest, the North, it's just, in my opinion, it's the private land out there. It's a lot, I don't want to take away from the hunters out there, but it's a lot easier out there because most of the terrain is agriculture, and then you have little wood lots and strips of woods. So it's a little bit easier to get on deer, locate deer out there than hunting down here on public land, and it's all woods.
Right.
Whether it's cypress, scrub oak, pines, palmetto flatwoods. So you've got to get in there and dissect the woods and do your homework to successfully be consistent, finding good deer.
Right. And talking about consistency, how consistent would you say you are at being able to locate a good buck down here in Florida and maybe be able to even pattern one? Because that seems to be a big issue for a lot of people, and even myself sometimes, is you'll catch some bucks and stuff on game camera,
right,
but then it's kind of almost like they just pass through that area. You're not really getting any consistency, maybe because of just the way the terrain is. They can pretty much bed anywhere in a lot of these places. There are bedding areas, but I wouldn't just say kind of like in the Midwest that you were talking about. There's no defined
cedar thickets,
real bedding areas in Florida. So what would you say your consistency rate is on being able to locate a decent buck and have an opportunity at taking that deer?
Well, I've been pretty fortunate the last handful of years. Typically the bucks that I harvest, those are the ones that I'm targeting. So going in, I know what bucks I'm pursuing, and I've been fortunate enough to harvest, some of those deer. Like you said, I will get that sporadic buck just cruising through, never get him again on camera. I run a lot of cameras. Last year I ran more cameras than I ever have, and I think I ran 36 cameras. And a lot of those are the inexpensive, $30, $40 Tasco Walmart brand cameras. Right. And, the red LED lights. And they tell you what you need to know, And I think the key, I give a lot of my credit, or most all of my credit, as far as locating bucks, to game cameras, mock scrapes, active real scrapes, and the use of Black Widow deer lure scents. I would say the combination of my scents and the cameras, and basically just boots on the ground, getting in there. And it seems like I do the same pattern every year on the areas that I hunt. I know where the scrapes are, and I go in there and just put my cameras out, and I'll hunt or scout with my cameras. For instance, one management area, I had 6 different areas that I was running cameras in last year. And I had one buck that was probably in the teens, mid-teens. One night had pictures of him. He just coming through, and that's all. Last year it was really difficult in that one management area to find a good buck. And the best buck that I had on camera was high 90s. 97, 98 inches.
Right.
And I ended up harvesting him within the first hour of the 4-day hunt.
Oh, nice.
So I had him patterned. Coming in there was acorns on the ground, scrapes. He was hitting the scrapes, feeding on acorns, had does in there on acorns. So my biggest contributor would be scrapes and acorns. Those are the two things that I key in on. And those are the two places that I run my cameras. Scrapes primarily, but I'll also run them on food sources. And it's a little more difficult when there's an abundance of acorns. The years that there's acorns everywhere, and that just spreads the deer out. I prefer the years that it's not a huge crop of acorns, and I can find that one live oak dropping those, I call them football acorns, the oblong acorns. Uh-huh. And when I can find that one tree dropping acorns, it seems like that's just a magnet, to the deer. And if I can locate 2 or 3 of those trees and put cameras on them, along with running the cameras on the scrapes, then I can pinpoint certain bucks, the buck quality that I'm looking for. And I try to target high 90s, 90, 100-inch bucks.
Right.
And I'll pass even though it's state land management area, and they're special op hunts, so they have to have 4 points on the side. And I'll pass the smaller 7s and 8s because I kind of treat it like my own lease, even though it's not, because I look at those smaller bucks as next year and the next year's crop of shooters.
Right.
And as I mentioned before, on a 4-day hunt, if I don't kill one, I'm perfectly fine with that.
Right.
I just enjoy getting out there and chasing them and doing all the homework. All that, it's not really work to me, the leg work, the scouting and the hot summer days out there. It's really enjoyable for me. And then when I go out and swap all my camera cards out, come back, sit here at the kitchen table, get the laptop open, going through 30-plus cards. It's like Christmas. It's
yes, it is.
So exciting, to see what you have. But I know that's a long answer. But boots on the ground, love scrapes, love running the cameras on scrapes, and that's where I get the most, pretty much my buck inventory on all the scrapes.
Okay. Well, let's talk about scouting, because scouting plays a major role in being able to be successful in the woods. What does your postseason look like? Do you do postseason scouting for these deer?
Not too much. I don't turkey hunt.
Okay.
I've shot a handful of turkeys throughout the years, and went out there, picked them up, shot a good gobbler with my bow. Never got the bug.
Okay.
Thank goodness.
Right. Yeah. Another
for
obsession.
My wife, right? Because I spend enough time and money on deer. I will leave some cameras out.
Okay.
During after the season, and I'll just replace the batteries, set them for one picture so the batteries will last longer, and then I'll just leave a handful of them out in certain places to get an idea of what bucks lived before they dropped their horns, which bucks made it through the season. And then hopefully when I start getting out there in July to start putting out my new batch of cameras for this year, then I'll go change out the batteries in those cameras and leave them. Other than that, I really, say after February, say the Green Swamp West hunts are over.
Okay.
I really don't go back out there from in March, April, May, June, July, and then I'll start going back out there maybe late July or August and start running. I'll put the cameras back on the annual scrapes that are every year, active scrapes, trails, and then in September, October, I'll go out there and see what trees are dropping acorns, and place them there. But other than that, I don't really do a lot of postseason right after scouting.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I'll do a little bit of scouting during turkey season. I turkey hunt, but I wouldn't call myself like a fanatic turkey hunter either. I know Walter, the co-host, he turkey hunted some, but then he got bit bad by the turkey hunting bug this year. He got on he got in a good area, and there was a bunch of birds, and I mean he was ate up with it this year. And I'm kind of the same way. Is in some of those months it's just not enjoyable to kind of be out there. I mean, you're dealing with ticks, red bugs, all kinds of other stuff, and I kind of like to let the deer rest for a while, just kind of let them get their minds off of hunting and all the pressure, and let them like get healthy again, because that's a lot of that plays into what their antlers are going to be the next year and all that stuff. So I'm kind of with you there. And then I'll start kind of getting fired up myself, kind of late July, early August. I'll get all my cameras out there. I've had some cameras running a little bit, but they were just from turkey season. Like I had some kind of out in roads from turkey season and stuff. And I actually checked one the other day because I'm like, I'm going to need to get this because I know the battery's got to be running low. And I had a bunch of pictures, and I actually had a really good buck just walk right past one of the cameras on the road. So I was kind of got me fired up.
Yeah,
like when you
definitely.
take that camera and you're like, oh man, that is a real nice deer. Already at this point, it was like the end of June, and I was like, the bug was really starting to bite at me. Then I was like, all right, it's time to get ready. Hunting season's coming, and like I mentioned before, it's not too far away.
Right.
So you mentioned that you'll start putting cameras and stuff out in late July, early August. Now, are you putting all those cameras out?
No, it'll take me a month probably to get all my cameras out, and I have to wait until find out what permits I get, whether it's a quota, regular quota, or the special op hunts.
Right.
And then once I determine what permits I have, what areas I'm going to be hunting, then I'll go hit maybe one area, two areas. With this heat, it's ridiculous, and I've spent many of all-day trips out there just miserable.
Right.
And so it'll take me probably a month to get all of my cameras out, my camera trot line, if you will.
Uh-huh.
And then, so when I go and check the cameras, I may not check all of them in one day. That's almost, near impossible. And then I'll have some cameras out in one management area, other cameras out in another management area. So, they're spread out a little bit.
Right. So what are you hoping to get out of your cameras when you first put them out?
Well, when I put them out, like I said, I put them out in late July. I try to get them out on or before August 1st is my kind of target. Mm-hmm. And so when I get out there, most of my cameras, then I put them on known scrapes.
Okay.
Or mock scrapes. And it might be a mock scrape that I made on August 1st, or whenever I set the camera, or it might be a mock scrape that I made 2 or 3 years ago that now has become an active yearly scrape. Okay. And so when I go out there, the scrapes are all dead. Obviously the leaves are in the scrape underneath the licking branches. So I take either my machete or find a stick right there close by, and I paw all the leaves and debris out of the scrape, open them up larger than life, so they're eye-catching to the deer, and juice them up with the Black Widow deer lure, put my cameras on them, and then go to the next one.
Okay. What Black Widow lure are you using at that time? Because I know they make different kinds.
Yes, my favorite is the Black Widow Hot and Ready Triple X, which is the doe and estrus.
Right.
Black Widow branch butter. That comes in a tube, and I use that on the licking branches, and it's like a syrupy consistency, and it's stronger than I thought it would be scent. But the deer, they love it. It's potent,
right?
And it really draws them in there. So I'll put that on the licking branches, the leaves. And then inevitably, it just drips into the scrape, it enhances the scrape. So Black Widow Hot and Ready Triple X. I'll use Hot and Ready, regular standard Hot and Ready. I'll use Matriarch. That comes from the Matriarch doe, the old doe. The Branch Butter Scrape Master, which is a combination of buck urine and doe and estrus urine. Okay. So it really gives the appearance that that scrape is being worked by a buck and a doe. So those are kind of my go-to. They have dominant buck, they have straight doe pea scent, but those are my go-to scents that I like using. And I'll go through it like water. I'll use some of my scrapes. I'll have scrape drippers where I'll put the scent in there and hang it over the scrape, well above the scrape, and pay close attention not to touch any of the licking branches directly over the scrape. But those are my go-to scents, and I've had bucks and velvet and does come in that same night that I've opened up those scrapes. And the cameras that I run on scrapes, I run them all on video mode, so I get to see the deer's reaction to the scents.
Okay.
And I can honestly 100% say I've never had a deer booger on the Black Widow deer lure. Where they come in there and they didn't like the smell and they spook.
Right.
Whatever they've got going on there at Black Widow, it's working.
Right.
You can open up some scents. You open them up and smell them, and it might have a strong ammonia smell. And when I get my Black Widow bottles, I'll open them up and quickly and smell them, and it just smells like what you would think a deer,
right,
should smell like. And I love that. That's my go-to scent and a huge contributor to my success over the years.
Yeah, I've seen you using those for sure in some of your videos on Facebook and things like that. So you're making the scrape. So why don't you, if you could, break down your whole process of making that scrape set up to get pictures of deer?
Okay. So I'll go in. I'm really scent conscious. So I wear my rubber boots. I never wear my rubber boots while driving. Okay. That's a personal thing that I do. So my theory on that is back that my 106-inch Nebraska deer that I showed you over there, which was my best deer at the time, back in '96, I think, with a bow.
Okay.
I was very proud. I'm still proud of him,
yeah.
But that was my biggest bow buck to date then. And when we got out there, the first morning, we left the hotel, went to get gas. My buddy pulled up the gas pumps. I got out. I had my lacrosse rubber boots on. Got out, went to the store, got my little honey bun, my coffee, got back in the truck, walked down to my stand, and there was probably a few inches of snow on the ground, light dusting. Well, as it got daylight, I could see my boot tracks coming down through the snow. Well, that morning, I had a pretty nice 7-point come walking through, and as soon as he hit my scent on my boots, he turned inside out. And without a doubt, he smelt that. What I believe happened is he smelt that gas scent from the gas pumps and whatever scent was on my boots. And I think a lot of times it's easy to think, okay, I'm wearing rubber boots, so I'm scent free. But keep in mind that during your everyday, Monday through Friday, you go to the gas pumps, you're filling up your truck. You get back in, now you're placing the gas scents from the concrete around the pumps. Now you're placing that on your floor mats, your gas pedal, your brake pedal. Then if you drive in the woods with your hunting boots on, now you're transferring that minute gas scents from your floor mats, gas pedal, brake pedal,
right,
clutch, whatever, onto your rubber boots. So I'm real particular with my scent. So I'll keep my rubber boots in the back of the truck. Every time I take them off or put them on, I'll spray them down with Scent Away spray. So then walk in to the scrape. I stay back, 20 feet, whatever, 15, 20 feet. Take my backpack off, get my Scent Away spray. I'll spray my boots. It's a little thing that I go through every time. Spray my boots real good try to eliminate as much foreign scent as I can. I'll wear rubber gloves. I'll find a stick, or like I said, my machete. If I'm using my machete, I'll spray my machete down the blade. walk over, and I'll clear all the debris out from underneath the licking branch down to bare dirt where it's real visible, and I open them up larger than life so it's real eye-catching to the deer. So it might be as big as 3 feet across the scrape.
Right.
And then after I scrape all the leaves and debris out, then I'll spray my Black Widow in there, Scrape Master, Hot and Ready Triple X. Even that early, I will still use Doe and Estrus Triple X, and the Scrape Master, which is the Doe and Estrus and the dominant buck urine. And then I'll apply my branch butter on there, and then turn the camera on, get in front of it, make sure it's, triggering. I always try to, before I walk off, let it catch a video or two of me, which basically time stamps it,
Right.
so I know it's working. And then when I walk up on it to check it, I always walk in front of the camera and let it get a video of me, so make sure everything's working, and go to the next one. And I'm real excited. They have Black Widow came out with snap caps for this year,
Okay.
which has interdigital gland and testosterone.
Okay.
And so I'm really excited about using those. And they're just little snap caps that you open, unsnap it, and you push it down into the dirt, level with the dirt, and it's like a gel, real thick gel.
Okay.
So I'm planning on trying those out.
Right.
I actually have up on my Georgia lease, I went up about 8 weeks ago, and I opened up a mock scrape underneath a magnolia and put a camera on it, and I used those snap caps in there. And like I said, this was back in June, maybe May, late
Right.
May, and tied the limb down because the limb was head high. I always carry string in my backpack, so I tied it around the branch, and then tied that limb down to provide a licking branch for the scrape. Tied it off, opened it up. So I'm going to have some intel on those snap caps.
Okay.
I should.
Right.
I'm hoping.
Right. Before you try them down here.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Well, talk about trees. Are there specific trees that you like to target to make your mock scrapes on?
Depending on the management area that I'm hunting, Green Swamp West, I found them under magnolias, scrub oaks. I've even found them underneath low-hanging cypress limbs
Okay.
off of a cypress tree. But typically, it's all terrain, individual terrain based. Green Swamp West, like I said, there's a number of different trees that I found them under. A lot of scrub oaks, oak limbs,
Right.
low-hanging live oak limbs, and Panasofsky magnolias is the big draw. I love the terrain there. The magnolia cabbage palm hammocks surrounded by cypress. Get out there on those little islands, and so there the dominant scraping tree are the magnolias. So as I'm walking through the woods, anytime I see a magnolia with low-hanging limbs, I just draw into it, go over there and look, and not every time, but a lot of times I will find, a scrape underneath those trees, and they like to rub those soft bark trees, whether it's a cypress, a magnolia, a cedar tree. Bucks tend to like to rub those over the harder oak
Right.
trees, So it's depending on what area I'm in is what trees I'm kind of looking for.
Okay. So you found a tree that you're kind of looking for. What makes you go, this would be a great spot to put a scrape?
A lot of times it's historically, I just know there's bucks, a good deer history, in that area. And a lot of times the scrapes that are in that general area, there may not be a good tree for a stand right there. So, like for Panasofsky, for example, a few years ago, there was a magnolia, big magnolia, and there was another magnolia right next to it that offered just incredible coverage for a lock-on in there. So what I did is there was no licking branch, there was no limb low enough for a licking branch, so I tied it down, and I didn't have rope on me then, and I used vines. I walked around and found vines and just twisted and intertangled those vines around the branch, and then slowly brought it down, and then twisted that vine around the base of the magnolia, the core base, and then intertwined that vine in there, and that held that licking branch down to provide a licking branch for that scrape. That was probably 3 years ago, maybe 4. And every year it's an active scrape. And I'll go to that scrape and put a camera on it, open it up like I explained earlier, and every year I get bucks on it. So I will make a mock scrape possibly where there's a good ambush spot next to it.
Okay.
Or I've made mock scrapes in new areas that I've gone to scout, and I may not know where all the scrapes are, so it's like, ooh, there's a perfect scraping tree right there. And I think deer, bucks, and does will utilize that licking branch year-round.
Right.
So the cameras that I've left in the woods, post-season, after the season, I've had does come up to the scrapes throughout the year, and they'll smell the licking branch. It's kind of, I think it's like a communicator.
Right.
Like a
little calling card.
Yeah.
Let them, I'm in the area.
Yeah. They'll chew on it. They'll rub their interdigital gland or preorbital gland on the leaves, chew on it. And, yeah, it's like a calling card. And so even though that's not an active scrape, it's an active licking branch per se, through the year. And even during the season, people will say, well, the scrapes are dried up. Well, that could very well be. And there's no fresh paw marks in the scrapes. But the cameras have told me that bucks and does, there'll be tracks in the scrape, but even though there's no paw marks and they're not actively keeping the scrapes cleaned out, there'll be tracks in the scrape, and my cameras will tell me, well, they're still coming up there and pausing and smelling that licking branch and then moving on.
Right.
And so that's why I love scrapes, because a lot of times when a deer comes up, their focus is on that scrape or the licking branch, and it gives me that opportunity to draw, and their focus is primarily taken away from me. They're in la-la land, working that licking branch or scrape. And then also, over the years, I found that they may not react to the sound of my bow going off as much. Like if a deer's walking through and I have to stop them.
Yeah.
Well, they stop, and now they're on alert. And then when I shoot, they have a more tendency, I believe, to duck the arrow or drop and whirl than if they stop on their own, and feeding or working the licking branch, and then you shoot. They're less likely, I think, because you don't give them that extra step to be on alert.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. All that makes sense. So are you just primarily hunting over scrapes?
Scrapes and food sources.
Okay.
And a lot of times it's a combination. There's acorns, and then there's a scrape. Could be a scrape right there by it.
Oh, okay.
Or a mock scrape that I made right by a traditional dropping white oak, or not white oak, but live oak, the football acorns.
Yeah. All right. So let's break this down some. So you go out, you've made your mock scrape, getting pictures of deer. How do you decide when you're going to hunt over that scrape? Because you said you got multiple cameras out on these management areas, and you're looking at each one of these cameras. Which one tells you, okay, I need to be over at this spot?
Well, whichever one has the biggest
biggest
bucks. primarily the spots I hunt are 4-day hunts. So
Okay.
once those dates come, I mean, you have to play the hand that you're dealt, whether it's a heat wave, pouring rain, storming, hopefully it's cold weather during those hunts. Basically, I will key in on the scrapes that are telling me the best intel. I just let the cameras dictate where I go.
And how often are you checking these cameras?
I try not to get in there. It's tempting, to really want to get back in there. I try to let them go at least a week.
Okay.
And then when I go in there and check them, still scent conscious, and I spray my boots down before going up there. I'm wearing rubber gloves, touching the camera, and opening the camera up, and then reapplying my scent to the scrapes. But I try to go a week in between.
Okay.
Especially as it gets closer to the 4-day hunt, then I might have to check them. I work every third day, so sometimes I'm in there, checking them.
Right.
One of the 2 days that I'm off.
Right. Yeah, especially when, like you said, it seems like a lot of these hunts in Florida are your like 3 and 4 day hunts. There's some management areas that you can just walk onto, but a lot in my area are just all quota hunts, like the limited entry quota hunts that I got 3 days to hunt. So do you think for those, are you going out and putting out mock scrapes even late July, August,
Yes.
if you know that you've got them? So all of your management quota hunts, you're going out late
Yes.
July, early August, and
try
setting it up.
Yep. I try to get them out there as early as I can. And that also helps to other hunters. It's public land, so other hunters that are going out there, typically somebody's got a camera here, and they won't put their camera on that scrape.
Right.
So early bird.
Right, yeah, you get there before they do.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, somebody's already hunting here for the most part. So you've been running scrapes for a long time in cameras. What times are you seeing deer on these scrapes? Because you hear a lot of different conflicting stories about scrapes where a lot of it's nighttime activity. Is that true?
Yes. Typically, like late summer, most all the action is either mostly at night, and then it seems like in early October, say Panasofsky. And I don't mind,
throwing the names out there.
Yeah, I don't mind. Panasofsky, it seems like early October, the bucks all of a sudden will start hitting them during daylight. And then it's, your typical prime 7:30, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, or, 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, your first couple hours, last couple hours of daylight.
Right.
But occasionally I'll get, like when it heats up closer to the rut, then it's game on, and I've had deer at all hours of the day, hitting big bucks, coming to the scrape at, 12:30, 1:30, and it has the temperature on the camera, and it's 86 degrees,
right.
And I think when it's on, it's, I try to stay in the stand as long as I can, and several all-day sits. On the 4-day hunts, you've got to take advantage of those hours and try to put yourself in the best tree that you can.
Yeah.
And by that is, the cameras dictate.
Yeah.
Wind direction, obviously.
Cameras, wind direction. Yeah, I never really asked that. So I guess, like you said, wind direction is going to play a role in what scrapes you're going to hunt. And so you go out to, you said Panasofsky. How many mock scrapes are you putting on that piece of public?
Oh, goodness. Just off the top of my head, I think I have 10 or 12 mock scrapes.
Okay.
And every mock scrape that I've made doesn't always work.
Right.
I've struck out, a lot on those. But the scent, the black-wooded deer usually brings them in.
Okay.
And then, my opinion, the way I look at it, once a deer comes in, starts hitting the licking branch, they're applying their scent. Well, now it's turned into a natural scrape.
Yep.
Then the next deer comes in, and then typically the young bucks So Panasofsky, for instance, August, September, and I'm like, I'm not going to get frustrated. I'm getting 70, 80-inch deer. And I'm like, nope, historically, not going to get down, because the end of September, early October, all of a sudden, boom, the 3 and 4 year olds start hitting the scrapes.
Right.
And then they, by mid-October, boom, daylight pictures. And I enjoy the early October. 2 years ago, I killed a 99-inch buck, 8-point, and he started hitting the cameras, the scrapes, a few days before the hunt in daylight.
Oh, nice.
So I was like, well, it's time to get in that stand.
Right.
And it ended up being that's my favorite spot, my go-to spot. And a quick little backstory on that, I had a really good friend of mine, firefighter in Sarasota. He passed away with cancer that year, 2 years ago. And he called me up and he told me he offered the permits to me. And that was one of the permits that I acquired from him and killed that 8-point. So that was an emotional hunt for me on that one. And then the 119-inch buck that I killed 2 years ago, that permit was also his.
Oh, okay.
And he told me in the last conversation I had, he said, James, do me a favor. And I said, Bill, no problem. What's that? He said, shoot a big one for me. And so it was real emotional when I shot that deer and recovered him. I felt like Bill was on my shoulder, right there with me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting in your house and you've got bucks from, like I said, all over the place, like you Ohio, Illinois, Kansas, and then you've got like a little, or I say little, but you've got a shrine of your Florida deer, and you've got a bunch of stud Florida bucks up there as well. Did you kill those over scrapes, or were those feed trees, or?
The first one there, 10-point, 114, that was buck sign and acorns.
Okay.
And he was just coming through there and feeding on acorns. The next one, 113 and 7/8, 8-pointer, that was hunting private land down in Mayaca City back in the early 90s.
Right.
That was a cow pasture. Poked him with a rifle at 200 yards. So,
right.
The next two, scrapes.
Okay.
The 124-inch 10-point and then 119-inch 10-point, scrapes and acorns.
Oh, okay.
Both of those bucks were with does, and the does came in and were feeding, and the bucks came in behind them. And the first one, the 124-inch 10, I watched him for 25, 30 minutes within 30 yards.
Oh, wow.
And the doe was feeding, and he was on red alert the whole time and just facing me, coming closer. He never fed. He was always head up, head jerking around, ears moving the whole time like little radars.
Right.
And he finally got in. I shot him at like 5 yards.
Oh, wow.
And basically right up underneath me. He went about 25 yards, went right through his heart. And I watched him fall. And then the other one, the 119-inch 10-point, same thing. Doe came in. I drew on him 3 times. The third time I took the shot. The first time was like 35. I didn't like the angle. I'm like, no, I'm not going to force the shot because the doe's 15 yards feeding happy. So I let down. He worked his way in. I drew on him again at 20, 25 yards. Had a little opening when he walked through it, and I didn't want to force it through that little opening. Be patient. I let down. He turned around, and I shot him at probably 12 yards.
Oh, wow.
And that was the permit that Bill gave me. And it was a flood of, it was I'm going to change the subject because I'm going to get emotional now.
Okay, but so you're saying you shot 12 yards, 5 yards. How far are you setting up off of a scrape with your stand?
Typically, I like a 12-yard shot. I would say within 25 yards.
Right.
My favorite spot in pan, I have the same tree that I always get in. I have a scrape about 22 yards. I have another scrape that's about 40 yards, and then back at my 8 o'clock position, I have a scrape over there about 30 yards.
Okay, so there's a lot of scrapes in that area.
And I'll run a camera on each of them. And some scrapes, I'll get a mature buck on one of them or maybe two of them, but not this one.
Okay.
So the bucks not necessarily are hitting every scrape in there. That's why I run cameras on every scrape I can find.
Yeah.
For the most part. So that's kind of like a scrape hole, and then also has acorns in there. And the acorns are dropping 15 yards, from the stand.
Okay, so it seems like a money setup is if you can get those acorns dropping and your scrapes at the same time. Because with acorns, it's obviously drawing the does 100%, and the deer and the bucks are going to feed on the acorns as well. But I'm sure those bucks, if they know that tree's dropping, they're going to be circling downwind of those areas anyways, just constantly checking for does at the same time. When is your rut down here? I know Florida is all over the map for rut dates. So is there like a kind of a defined rut down in this area?
Well, you can pretty much hunt the rut, I believe, year-round here in Florida.
Right.
What is today, the 13th, 14th of July?
Yep.
And South Florida, they're probably rutting close to now.
They're getting ready to amp up to rut.
But the places I hunt, like Panosofsky, it's really good scrape hunting early October. I've physically seen bucks with does around the 10th of October in there while I'm out scouting. I've seen chasing in mid-October. Probably late October through mid-November, and right around Halloween, the closest you can get to Halloween, the better.
Okay.
About 6 years ago, November 1st, it was like 50 degrees when I left the truck. Probably to this date, November 1st, I believe it was maybe 2013 or so. Best day that I've ever had in the Florida deer woods.
Oh, wow.
I sat all day. I was sitting on like 2-liter bottle size rubs on magnolias in there. And I ended up that November 1st day passing 2 bucks in the 90s, seeing, I think I saw 11 deer total and 6 different bucks, something like that. Passed 2 pretty good bucks. First day, I was thinking, man, if it's first day, I'm seeing this much action, what does day 2, 3, and 4 hold? And plus, I was sitting on the big buck sign.
Yeah.
And so I opted to pass those 2 bucks, and I ended up not filling a tag on that hunt, which was fine.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't kill one that day, that in my mind, that was still probably the best day I ever spent in the woods, because I saw chasing, I saw 2 bucks posturing up on one another. I was sitting on a feed tree, plus there were scrapes. One of the bucks snort wheezed at the other one. A doe came in, peed, she left. Short time later, a little 6-pointer came in, and I said to myself, he's going to go over and smell where she peed and lip curl. I said that in my head. He walked over there, smelt exactly where she peed, probably an hour before, stuck his nose up and lip curled. And so I saw 2 bucks sparring, 2 little bucks sparring. So I saw just a variety of deer activity that you don't typically get to see. And sat all day, and I probably didn't go an hour between deer sightings. Deer were just moving around. It's cool weather, prime time to be in the woods. So
Okay, so
To further answer your question, so there I would say starts ramping up middle October through second week of November. That 3-4 week period, peaking around November 1, Halloween. Green Swamp West, on the other hand, I would say around the first of the year, mid-December, they have their second archery hunt. And I've shot several deer, calling them in, whether it's with the horns, running, or I called one in. I gave him the horns. He looked. He was 150 yards away. He looked, kept going, walking across the Palmetto Flat. Gave him the grunts. He turned, looked, kept going. He's 100, 150 yards out. It's like, dadgum. Gave him the snort wheeze. He stopped. His body turned dark. Pinned his ears back. Turned around in his tracks. Constantly started licking his nose. His tongue was just licking his nose. He came all the way into 30 yards and shot him. So, real responsive to calling, mid-December. All 3 gun hunts.
And that's on public land,
yes.
Right? Because you'll get a lot of people like, oh, the deer don't respond to antlers and grunts. And I've had them respond to grunts, but I mean, I wasn't hunting public land then. I was hunting some private stuff, and they would be on a full sprint, and I'd grunt at them or whatever, and they'd stop on a dime and then come charging in. But a lot of guys, I think, are not really receptive to calling because they hear all these stories about, oh, you're just going to scare everything in the woods away. But you found that not to be true.
I joke around with my buddies, and I say I'm a one-man band up in the tree because I will have my grunt tube, I'll have my horns, I'll have my can call, and then I have, I just do the snort wheeze with my mouth. And I will see little bucks or does, and then I will grunt or can call just to see what reaction I get out of them.
Okay.
And a lot of times there'll be does within 30 yards, and I may grunt or can call, and I believe they can hear it, but sometimes they don't even, they just write it off.
Yeah.
Other times they will look up, maybe coming, closer to me, looking around. But I love calling. I mean, I've had really good success. Rattling, I might have a response 1 out of 50 rattling sequences,
right?
Or 100 rattling sequences, but I know it works.
Yeah.
I like to blind call. A lot of people may be hesitant. I've had people tell me they don't like calling unless they see the deer.
Right.
But about every 20 minutes or so, I'm doing something.
Okay.
Grunt, can call, a blind, snort wheeze, or tickling the horns. Because my way of thinking is 20 minutes ago, a buck cruising wasn't in earshot of my calls. Well, now he may be close enough to hear,
right.
And he's either going to continue what he's doing or come and investigate. So I like to do something about every 20 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, you don't hear that a lot from Florida hunters.
Yeah.
So I don't know too many that I've heard. Now I have some buddies that will, because they get bored, they'll and actually there's a story, and I ended up missing this deer because my muzzleloader was off, like 12 inches whenever I shot. But me and my buddy were hunting this stretch, and it was kind of this bigger open stretch, but it's just the way you could see, kind of like get an idea of what the deer are doing. And when they're chasing does, they chase deer across this stretch, and it's a long stretch. So he's like, hey, I know you're going to be set up over here, but do you mind if I set up like a couple of 100 yards down the way? Because with a muzzleloader, I mean, 200, past 200-ish, you're not really probably going to take the shot. And if they're running, trying to get them to stop, take quick shots, it's difficult to do. So I was like, nah, man, you can set up down there. So he's setting up, and I was actually seeing deer a bunch that day, like chasing. But where he was like tucked in kind of behind this tree, so he really couldn't see what was going on much further to the south of where he was. And I had seen a bunch of action, but he hadn't seen anything. So he was sitting in a stand, and he had his cane. He's like, I'm just going to just start turning this can over. So he turned it over 6 or 7 times, and I'm sitting down at the bottom. I didn't know he was turning the can, and I look up and about 100 yards or so away from me, because he was to the north of me. So the deer had heard it and was coming in from the south, kind of downwind. I guess he was coming downwind to check to see. And he kind of steps out, and he's like looking in the direction of my buddy. And this is probably 125-inch 8-point that steps out, just giant deer.
Nice buck.
And so he steps out, and I'm like, oh, shoot, he's there. And we had like this little spot in the center that we're like, okay, if it's on this side, then I'm shooting. If it's on that side, then you're shooting. And he stepped out on my side, and I was like, okay. So I'm getting ready to shoot. Well, I guess he had turned and gotten downwind to my buddy, because the wind was actually blowing kind of that direction. And he starts taking off. And I yelled at him. I was just like, hey, just to get him to stop. Because sometimes you just got to be real loud, especially when they're in a full sprint. He stops. I'm on him. Take the shot. He spun around, went back in the woods, and I was like, I don't know if I hit that deer or not. And my buddy was even, and he saw it all go down. Like he saw the deer step out, and he thought when I yelled, I was yelling his name to take the shot. I was like, no, I wasn't yelling for you to take a shot. And so the deer run off. We waited for a little while. He's like, I didn't really hear you hit it. I was like, I don't know. So we went down there, we're looking, and we never could find any sign of blood. So I'm like, okay, well, I was like, I guess I just missed him because I rushed a shot, whatever. And then I took my muzzleloader home and shot it, and then it was way off. It was like 12 inches off at 100 yards or something. And I was like, well, that might explain why I missed the deer. Or I probably would have missed either way. I mean, it was a big deer, because he's like, man, he's like, that was a really big deer that you missed. And I was like, yeah, just keep rubbing.
Yeah, rub it in.
Just keep and he got to see it all, so it wasn't even so he's back at the fire station, because he's a firefighter too. So he's telling them all about how I missed this deer, this big huge. I was like, the gun was off, I swear. But yeah, and I was like, and he's like, yeah, I was turning my can. He's like, I had just done it. Like he said, I had literally just done it like a couple of minutes ago. And like I said, that deer came in, down, and he was looking dead in the direction where that noise was coming. I was like, and that was a big deer. And I'm like, well, obviously calling will work. It may not work every time in Florida, but it does work. And what you're saying kind of goes along with that. It was like, it's just another tool in the tool bag that you can use to make you more successful, especially on public land here in Florida, where it's already the odds are kind of stacked against you, and you're just using all of these strategies to give you more success.
Right. Yeah, just a tool in the tool bag.
Yeah.
And I try not to overcall. I try to give them just enough to tweak their curiosity, because I believe deer are curious and creatures of habit, choosing the path of least resistance and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I love calling. I've had some good responses.
Yeah, because I've even seen, like we talked about on a prior podcast, is like even their curiosity, like if you're using a climber, like going up the tree in a climber, making that noise. I don't know if it sounds like a buck rubbing on a tree or whatnot, but then get to the top and you look down and there's like a deer underneath your stand from hearing that climber. It didn't spook them. Like I had them coming up and they were just kind of like sniffing around the tree where that noise was being made. And I was like, well, they're definitely curious animals for sure. But I believe like some of these big bucks, like they're definitely weary as well. But heck, if everybody believes that calling doesn't work, then they're not getting pressured with a bunch of calls down here. So that probably helps as well. There's probably not a lot of people using calls, so they probably are more like, oh, I don't. It's not like something like you hear the horror stories in like Michigan and places like that where everybody's like breaking the rattling antlers out and there's so many hunters stacked up in a small area. Now, do you feel like the public land gets pressured hard down here?
Definitely. Certain public land areas get hunted harder. That's why I prefer the special opportunities.
Right.
There's fewer numbers, and so it's a better experience overall, better opportunity. But that being said, there's not deer behind every tree.
Right.
You still have to go out there, and if you want to be consistently successful, and I enjoy it. I enjoy getting out there and scouting and running cameras. But that's what you have to do to be successful in those short 4-day hunts. And I try my best to have target bucks in mind. So when I go to a stand, for the most part, I know what bucks I'm after. The 8-point that I killed 2 years ago, I made a post on my Facebook, and I'm electronically challenged per se. I don't edit any of my videos. I try to make them as short as possible.
Right.
And then I just post them right to Facebook. And the one buck I killed that on Bill's permit, I thought it was a 7-pointer. And I had my 8-point was my best deer in there. He was like 99 inches. And then the 7-point, he was framed the same. But he didn't have a G3 on his one side.
Okay.
But framed pretty close to the other buck. So when I shot him, I thought he was my 7. And then when I got down, trailed him, found him, he had a little cabbage palm over his rack, and I picked his rack up, shook the cabbage palm off, and that G3 popped out on the other side, and I was like, holy mackerel. This is my good 8.
Right.
To sit in the 7, this was my number 1 target buck
that's
that year.
Always nice.
And as far as calling, I think it has a lot to do with the time of year, the demeanor, where they are in the stage of the rut, the pre-rut, whatever. As it gets closer, their testosterone is increasing. So, while, like, say early October, my calling may not call in my target buck. But Halloween Day, I may do a calling sequence, and he's all jacked up on testosterone and comes crashing in, looking for those 2 bucks fighting or whatever. But so I think it's the timing, the mood that they're in. And so my advice would be not to call too much, but just give them a little bit, every 20, 30 minutes. Because 20 or 30 minutes ago, like I said, a buck might have been out of earshot.
Right.
And he's just cruising through the woods, doing his thing. Now he's 150 yards closer, 200 yards closer than he was 20 minutes ago. Now call, he hears it. There's a chance that he's going to sneak in and check it out.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. And like you said, you've been successful with it. So that always helps when there's success. But people need to keep in mind that, like I said, it's not going to work every time you do it. And that's just one of the things going into it that helps you be more successful. And heck, I might start calling more now. now that you're telling me that you've had some pretty good success with calling, for sure. What about, we haven't mentioned bedding or anything like that on this podcast yet, and we've mentioned a lot about hunting some food sources, hunting your scrapes, and me and Walter, we've kind of always been like, it's just so hard for bedding because it seems like they can almost bed anywhere. Yeah. And there's certain areas that look like bedding, but they're huge. They're huge. They're not just like little pockets of bedding. Right. So do you focus on that at all?
No. In the Midwest, certain places that I hunt, there's like cedar thickets,
Right.
And you just don't go down into the cedar thickets because that's, they're bedding. But here, I mean, I think, you touched on it earlier, they can bed anywhere.
Right.
To me, it all looks the same. It's thick.
Yeah.
They can bed in sawgrass. They can bed in palmetto patch. They can bed in the thick scrub oaks and palmettos. They can bed out in the middle of a palmetto pine flatwoods. So I don't really even consider, bedding areas versus, or I wonder if this is a bedding area.
Right.
Because I think they'll just lay down wherever.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Right. Because I know you got a lot of Midwest guys and stuff that they're talking about hunting like specific buck beds and things like that. And I'm just like, that's just not a thing here, really. I mean, it's just, I don't know that I've ever been able to locate a specific buck's bed and to say that he's using that bed enough for me to go in there and try to hunt it. And I would think it would be even just difficult to even get in on a bed quiet enough on a deer here in Florida, just because it's hard not to make noise and to be able to sneak in on something that's you think that maybe bedded 30 yards away, and then some guys are hoping that they're just they get in there early enough where they hope that the buck's going to come bed, and they're just waiting the buck out to when he gets up to move around throughout the day. And I haven't really come across anybody in Florida that's ever been able to tell me a story of them hunting like specific buck beds for deer. Or a lot of people aren't even hunting specific deer for the most part. They're just going out and like, oh, this looks like a good area. There's some good sign here. And they shoot whatever buck kind of walks in. But when you're running cameras like you do, then you can be like, oh yeah, I recognize that deer. That's that, like you said, that's that 7. That's that 8 that I've been seeing a lot. And you can kind of make a pattern, because I think that's a lot of what it is you're trying to pattern these deer, and it seems like it's a little bit easier for you whenever you're running your mock scrapes and things
they're
like
drawn to them, certain spots.
Well, what would be some advice that you would give to someone that is just getting into hunting?
Being scent conscious. Don't wear your hunting boots driving, like I touched on before. Scent away spray. Control your scent. Pay attention to the wind. Boots on the ground.
Right.
Try to spend as much time as possible before your hunts scouting, finding food sources, obviously your scrapes, and then if you're just starting to get into hunting, just have fun and don't set your sights too high. And I'm not one to criticize someone for shooting a small buck. Just because I wouldn't target a certain size buck doesn't mean that the next hunter needs to have the same criteria as me.
Right.
And don't set your sights too high. Be conscious of, it's really not about killing an animal, punching a tag per se. Just go out there and have fun and try to learn from other people. My mom always told me, learn from other people's mistakes.
Right.
So maybe you won't make the same mistakes. And so, just try to get as much information as you can from friends, other hunters. And a lot of hunters are real hesitant, to tell you their secrets or their honey holes. And I've told many of people, let them sit my stands, my trees, if I don't have a hunt, or if it's a young hunter, kids, I've told dads, hey, took them in there. This is a good spot.
Right.
Let your son hunt here on the next hunt. And one elderly gentleman, he's a retired Hillsborough County deputy. He hunts Panisofsky, and I've become friends with him. And one year he was like, James, I'm not finding any sign. Of course, he can't get around, real good. And, I told him, I said, come on. So I showed him a pretty easy spot to get to, and he ended up killing a 7-point that year off of that spot. So, and he hunts it. He said, do you mind if I hunt that spot? No, have at it.
Right.
I've got a bunch of spots. So I don't mind helping people out and showing them, and that's how you learn,
Yeah, that makes sense. Find somebody that can be a mentor for you and kind of help with the learning curve. Because think about how long did it take you to get to where you're at now?
Oh, I'm almost 52, so
right,
and I'm still learning.
Yeah, exactly.
Every year, it seems like I learn something. I don't. By no means do I think I know it all. I'll be the first to admit I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, so to speak. But I've done this long enough. I have kind of developed a pattern, and I know what works. So I kind of just stick to what I know. Mm-hmm. And so every year I try to do the same thing and mimic it and just build on that. Yeah. So, and I don't mind. Look me up on Facebook, send me a friend request. I don't have a YouTube channel. I want to get one.
Right.
And if I do, it's going to be Simple James.
Okay.
That's going to be my YouTube channel.
It's a good name.
And, but yes, I mean, I'm on Facebook. Send me a friend request, and if you ever get drawn for Panisofsky or Green Swamp West, I don't have an issue.
Yeah.
If I can, I'll take you in there and show you a tree to climb.
Right. Well, and I think that's part of the hunter process is you get to a point where you just want to share what you know to help others get involved in the sport as well, because we got to keep the sport growing. We don't want it to at one point where we got a bunch of people that don't hunt anymore and then they take it away from us.
Right.
So that's great. Well, let's talk about the deer in the room here. We've got this deer in your room that really stands out in your room that you were able to take in Florida in 1999, over 200 inches. I mean, you talk about a deer of lifetimes. That's not even a deer of a lifetime. That's like deer of lifetimes in the state of Florida. I think you mentioned what it gross score like 212 or 214 somewhere.
212 and net's 206. So
net's 206, and it's just got stuff everywhere. It's got a split brow. It's got drop tines. It's got just stuff going all over. How many scoreable points did it have?
I believe he has 25 scoreable. He's a typical 10, so his frame is a 10-point frame. As a 10-point, he scores 151 and change, 151 and 3/8 as a 10-pointer. And then the rest of the inches are the non-typical points.
Right.
So he grosses 212 and nets 206, so he's in the book at 206. And the previous state record, I believe, was 204 taken by Larry Durrance.
Okay.
Back in the 40s, up in the Panhandle.
Oh wow.
And so I killed him September 25th, 1999, opening day of the archery season, and so 21 years ago. And he's thankfully he's still the current present state record.
Right.
But if the person that breaks it, records are meant to be broken. I'd love to meet them and shake their hand and tell them congratulations and kind of give them some pointers, and tips, and be prepared for the haters. Cause
right. Oh yeah.
There's haters out there.
For sure.
And rumors will start and all that. So anyway, September 25th, 1999, killed him out of Green Swamp West, which is 14 miles. The gate's 14 miles from the house here.
Yeah, I passed it on the way here.
Yeah. And it was the first year that was open to the special opportunity hunts. And that's when you apply over the summer. I think it's June.
Right.
You apply. It's $5 an application. You can spend up to $495, I think, per hunt. If you're drawn, if you're successful, they'll notify you. You log in through FWC, myfwc.com, log on to your account. You know how it goes. You find out what you're drawn. If you're successful in your draw, then you pay $100 for the 4-day permit, and then they mail you the permit, and then you go in. So back then in '99, I wasn't even gun hunting then. Of course, I'd gun hunted, but I was so involved and deep into archery, I didn't even apply for the 3 gun hunts the very first year. I applied for the 2 archery hunts and got both of them.
Oh, wow.
So if I would have applied for the gun hunts, then more than likely I would have gotten 1, 2, maybe 3 of them, all of them. So I knew it was going to be open. I applied, was drawn. I scouted through the summer, all through the summer. And back then, it was better hunting back then, obviously, because it hadn't been open in a while. So, but still, there weren't deer behind every tree.
Right.
So I scouted all summer, located several bucks in the registry, over 100 inches.
Yeah.
And they were all in velvet, and they were all bachelored up when I was seeing them. But it was just, I'd heard rumors of the quality of bucks that were in there, and I was like, man, I want to find a better buck. So I kept going. Well, it was the week before the season. It was a Monday, and the season opened the next Saturday. So I went in there right after daylight to a new area, and I walked in, and coming off of this Blackjack Ridge, crossing a fire trail, was a bunch of big tracks. And I said, man, this has got to be a bachelor group. So I turned and I started following those tracks. And they took me through some scrub oaks, scattered palmettos, and it was a sandy, like a long sandy ridge. And in the leaves, I would lose the tracks, and I would just zigzag like a beagle trying to pick up a trail.
Right.
And I would pick the tracks back up, and those deer were on a set pattern, had been on a set pattern, because when I would see the tracks were old and fresh tracks going both directions. So I just kept on the fresh tracks, and that took me to another fire break several hundred yards up. And on that fire break, maybe a 6, 8, 10 foot section on that fire trail, the sand was just soft.
Right.
All the other sand was hard and packed, and they had crossed there so much that, I mean, it was just, the sand was just sandy.
Mm-hmm.
And those big tracks are just crossing back and forth there. So I continued across the fire break, went down in there about another 100, 150 yards, and they had gone in there, and it looked like they had bulldozed a bunch of scrub oaks, blackjack oaks, did some bulldozing work maybe a year prior or something, because there were a lot of low, like knee, thigh-high blackjack oaks.
Okay.
And they had clusters of acorns on them. And the deer that bachelor group was in there feeding. So here it is, an hour after daylight, and I'm just standing there. I'm like, man, there's tracks all over the place. And I look up, and my buck is standing there about 30 yards away with his head down in the thigh-high scrub oaks,
Right.
blackjack oaks, whatever they were. And I could just see points sticking up, and he lifted up his head, and I couldn't believe it. And I thought, that's what I'm looking for.
Right.
Obviously, you know. And I could hear him chewing, crunching on those acorns.
Okay.
And he's just looking around, swings his head back around, and he scratching his side with one of his drop tines, going back feeding. And I watched him for probably 10 minutes, him walking around feeding, and then all of a sudden, I guess he caught wind of me, and he snapped to alert, and he started walking off. You know how they'll pop their front leg hoof down with every step, real hard and quick, and started bobbing his head. Well, he walked off, went around a flag pond, and then stood over there about 100 yards looking back my direction, and then turned and just dissolved into this over-your-head gallberries and palmettos with a couple of oak trees. It was like a little island of the gallberries, thick palmettos, and oaks that protruded out to that pond area. Well, we talked about bedding area. Well, that's where that bachelor group was hanging out.
Okay.
So he was solo that morning. So I immediately picked out a tree. I said, well, they're feeding. So I picked out a pine tree, came home, got a stick ladder and a lock on, went back out there, pedaled back in, parked my bike, and this was 12 o'clock, 11:30, 12 o'clock, middle of the day now. I'm walking in, stick ladder in one hand, lock on in the other, hot. I'm walking in, I get about 60, 80 yards from that same spot. I look up, and all four of them are right there feeding on those blackjack oaks, right where he was early that morning. And it was him, probably a 130-inch 10-point,
Wow.
a mid-teens 8-point, and then probably a 105-inch 8-point. And they're all just standing there looking at me, and then they just turn and start flagging off, running, flagging, and they run across that flag pond and go right into that same little point with the over-your-head gallberries.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, shoot. Well, now they know they're being pressured. But I hung my stand, came out, didn't go back in there until the following Saturday opening morning. Got back in there, first one at the check station, checked in, got back in there, got climbed up. It was a full moon. I'm assuming it was these 4 bucks. And I had a camera then. Because I told my wife, I said, I don't know if I'm going to kill him, but I want to get a camera and get him on film, even if I don't, because he's the biggest thing I've ever seen.
Right.
So I had a little Sony, camcorder
Yeah.
and a camera arm, and I'm mounting that camera arm to the tree, and I hear something, and I look behind the tree underneath me. Like I said, it was full moon. There was real sandy right in there, and I could make out one buck walk underneath me, and I could tell he had a rack. And they just kind of walked under me, and the other ones I couldn't see, but I could hear them moving through, and they were just going in the direction of that flag pond and that point where I saw them twice go before. So I think that bachelor group walked through before daylight. I sat all day, saw a doe late morning. Middle of the day, it sounded like horses moving around out there in that thicket.
Uh-huh.
And I think they got up and were just walking around, and I could just hear them, which was 150 yards away. So knowing that he was in there, or in that area, I wasn't coming out. I was dedicated all day sit. So I sat all day. Early, about 4, a thunderstorm came through, and it was a pretty good one. Lightning and dark clouds, pretty heavy rain, and I just sat through it. Took the camera off, put it in my little camera bag underneath my seat, just hunkered down and rode the storm out. And my favorite time, what I've noticed, my favorite time over the years, afternoon hunts, right after a hard rain, about an hour before dark, it's almost like a light switch.
Right.
And animals just start moving after a hard rain right before dark. So that was a scenario that was fixing to present itself, and I knew they were in that area. So storm passed, and there was still some distant thunder, and I look up, and he's over there standing on the edge of those gallberries, and what caught my eye is he was shaking just like a dog after giving him a bath.
Right.
He was just, his whole body and his horns were shaking, and I was like, holy mackerel. So got my camera out of the camera bag, remounted it, was able to get footage of him over there, and then I caught movement, a flicker, and there's that mid-teens, 115 or so inch 8-point was over there with him. Well, the 8-point, the other 2 bucks weren't with him then. Well, the 8-point, I watched him just start walking, and he made his way up to that crossing, the fire break crossing, where I'd originally, scouted and
Right.
found them where they were crossing. Well, he committed and was going to the crossing. My buck was feeding around underneath an oak tree over there, but he kept looking up at the 8-point at his buddy. And then he'd go back to feeding. Well, a few minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes later, he started committing and started walking that way. Now, he's about 100 yards from me. And I said, well, he isn't coming by me. I have a good idea where he's going. He's going to that crossing. So, stick ladder and lock on. If I was in a climber, I wouldn't have been able to do this. So, I grabbed my bow with my teeth, the top limb, and I couldn't do that. I've tried. I can't do it now. But the adrenaline.
Right.
I didn't lower it on my rope. I just grabbed the top limb, swung around, and started climbing down my stick. And at the same time, I'm looking, and once I had to pause because he had his head up, and then when he went back to feeding, I climbed down. Once I got almost to the ground, it was a little hilly there. It wasn't real flat, so I couldn't see him. He couldn't see me. Then I crawled and bent over walking, and I did a little half circle, and I got in front of him, between him and the fire break crossing. I went as far as I dared to the edge of the cover, the scrub oaks that was right there. I slowly stood up, and I'm just standing there, face net, gloves, just standing there next to the scrub oak tree. And I finally see him, and he's just making his way. And then I was shooting a single fixed 20-yard pin. But I'd been practicing out to 50 yards, and I knew that the bottom of my sight housing, where my level was, I was shooting milk jugs down there. There's a sandy spot on the side of 33 there. I was digging out little pits, standing up on my toolbox, and I would dig out these little pits, 20, 30, 40, and 50, and put a milk jug in those little pits. And then I would stand there and shoot those milk jugs from my toolbox off my back of the truck. And the 50-yard milk jug, I knew if I put my level, the bottom of my sight housing, right on that milk jug, the broadhead would hit the milk jug. So that was my 50-yard aiming point.
Right.
I didn't have a rangefinder, and I was like, man, he's out there about 50 yards. So I just drew back, held the bottom of my sight housing right on him, shot, and spined him. His rear end dropped, he collapsed, and instantly his head was coming up, and he's trying to dig, with his front legs. Well, that 8-pointer, his buddy that was with him, I never saw him prior to me taking the shot. Instantly, boom, 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 like 2 jumps, and that 8-pointer is standing over my buck, as if to say, what's going on, dude? What's going on? And I hollered. I jumped up and let out a wahoo, and instantly that 8-point darted back in the direction that they came from. So, and I could see my deer trying to get away, digging with his front legs. So I knocked another arrow, ran out to about 30, 35 yards from him. First shot was 53, what I stepped it off.
Okay.
And took another shot probably from 30, 35 yards as he was quartering away, and it hit him like right behind the last rib, and it exited his brisket. So it went right up through the goodies.
Yeah.
And then he collapsed. I laid my bow down, ran back to the tree, climbed up, got my camera, turned it on, was crying, couldn't believe what just happened.
Right.
Gathered my stuff, climbed back down, walked out there to him, and set the camera up, got around in front of him, and on the recovery. So that's how it went down.
Wow. That's a really good story. I didn't realize that you had to get out of your tree stand and put on a little spot and stock action on them, guessing the yardage.
Yeah.
I mean, rangefinders weren't that big back in
99.
99. Heck, even when I first started hunting, though, I don't think I was using a rangefinder back in 07. But that buck now, you told me when I got here, is at the Bass Pro Shops in Missouri, right?
Right. So in around 2001, Bass Pro purchased him. I was contacted by Bass Pro. They try to acquire every state record for their Whitetail Museum in Springfield, Missouri. So they purchased him, I believe, in 2001, maybe late 2000. And so the original buck is in the Whitetail Museum in Springfield, Missouri, which is, I think, their home, Bass Pro's home.
Right.
And then I believe all the Florida stores have a replica in it. And I know some of the other states throughout the country, or some of the other Bass Pros throughout the country, they have replicas in them as well. And he's also part of the Bass Pro King of Bucks tour.
Oh, wow. That's neat.
So they came and actually did an interview around 03, 04, and it was on their King of Bucks TV show. So that was pretty cool. We actually had to get permission from FWC, and FWC's PIO went out there with us. We went out to the exact spot, did an interview at the exact spot where I killed him.
Okay.
And basically just went through and told the story, and so that was pretty cool.
Wow. Is there anywhere anybody could find that now? Is that like on YouTube or anything?
Like I said, I don't have a YouTube channel. I'd like to get one.
Or that episode? Like, is that episode out anywhere?
I believe I have one copy of the original tape.
Right.
I've got the original footage, but I had some DVDs made. Back then they were DVDs.
Right.
A lot of people, what's a DVD? But, I did some shows, deer hunting shows and stuff, for several years after it became the official record, and I sold the DVDs at the booth and stuff. And to be honest, I can't find a copy.
Right.
So, as big a deer as he is and as significant as he is, to me it's just it's a deer, and I'm proud of him. But, I don't walk around like a peacock.
Right.
But it's a special deer, and, I'm proud to have him, and it still seems surreal, what he is.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, he stands out for sure. He's beautiful buck, no doubt. But then you've got a wall that's got a bunch of really good Florida bucks that anybody would like to take out in Florida. So you've and it's weird because, like I said, you killed a 206-inch, 212-inch deer in Florida, and a lot of people are like, well, what does he do now? He's like, he's reached the pinnacle of the biggest deer that you can kill in Florida, but you love it so much it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
like,
it
You
does.
go out and kill a 200 every year, you're still going to go out and try to get on the next one, because that's part of, to me, that's part of the game. That's part of the chase that we're all kind of after for the most part.
Yeah.
I actually like more putting the pieces of the puzzle together than the actual killing of the deer. It's more about the whole process.
Before we did this interview, when you told me you wanted to do it, I kind of added up. I have roughly 50 to 60 hours of scouting prior to a 4-day hunt is about what I put in to those hunts. So, and I still I'd rather shoot a doe with my bow than, a bigger buck with my rifle.
Right.
I love bow hunting. I get emotional, all worked up, dry heaving. And I still feel that way when I shoot a doe. And it doesn't have to be a big buck. Like I said earlier, I enjoy the pursuit, the leading up to the hunt. I'll pass a bunch of nice deer on these special 4-day hunts. But, like I said, they're the future shooters.
Right.
They're fine deer, and a lot of people, I'd be happy with them, but I don't have to kill one for it to be a successful hunt for me. So, yeah, but I still get excited on shooting a doe or a 90-inch buck.
Yeah, I've seen some of your Facebook videos.
Yeah,
like the after the fact, and it's
just raw emotion.
You're pumped, excited, everything going on at the same time. Well, I am glad you decided to come on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
When I called you, I was like, well, I hope this guy wants to say he'll be a guest, because I'm looking forward to hearing the story. And I mean, obviously, part of the reason I wanted to come down here was to lay eyes on that buck as well. But you've just had so much success in the woods since then. It was good to be able to come down here. And I always like doing the podcast in person anyways, because I feel like you just get more out of it It's just being in the same room with somebody as opposed to over the phone. And it was good to get to hear the stories of all your bucks right when I first got here. Kind of get to know you. Is there anywhere people can find you, like Facebook or anything like that?
Just Facebook, James Stovall on my I guess main page.
Okay.
There's a picture of myself and my family in front of a fire truck. I'm a firefighter like you, as you know. And the main picture is my wife and I. And I have a November rut hat on, and then the little round picture of my family in front of the fire truck, James Stovall. Yeah, shoot me a friend request, look me up, and I'm just a average overweight guy. But if you're ever in the area of Tampa or Lakeland, Adventures Archery is a great archery shop. Some great people. You and I are fixing to head up there and sling some arrows, and I'll introduce you to Jared, and he's great. All the techs up there are great, and just shoot often and keep practicing, and put boots on the ground, and everyone's getting excited for the upcoming season that's rapidly approaching.
Yep. Well, I'm going to close this one out, and I hope that this podcast and story inspires you to get outside and enjoy the great outdoors.
Well, I appreciate it.